Greetings, glory and honor to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. I was recently on a show with Dr. Dan Stern Cardinal. I would like to publicly thank him for putting me on, letting me come on a show along with Carissa Shipman. And in that discussion, and I've repeated this many times, that so-called natural selection, one, is a misnomer. It's more properly described as the drive to make more efficient copiers. And one way you make more efficient copiers is to dispose of things that you don't immediately need. This is a disaster. And the other thing, Dr. Dan was insisting that the math has proven it and the theory has proven it. I have contested that by saying the definition of evolutionary fitness is flawed. It's a disaster. And I've cited literature and I pointed out to examples, and they don't seem to be listening. But I have kind of a little bit of sweet revenge here. I was just randomly Googling, and my Google system occasionally will do an AI overview and just scan the literature. And this is so funny. This is exactly what I've been saying. So let me show it to you, just so you see it. So I typed in fitness, ill-defined concept, evolutionary biology. And lo and behold, the AI computer could find this. I mean, I could walk you through this, but let's see what AI has to say, and then we can justify it logically. In evolutionary biology, fitness is considered an ill-defined concept because while it's a central idea for understanding natural selection, it can be difficult to precisely quantify and is highly dependent on the specific environment and context, meaning an organism's fitness can vary depending on the situation, making it challenging to define universally. Essentially, fitness is more about an organism's reproductive success relative to others in its population, rather than a single measurable attribute like strength or size. Like, duh! Have I not repeated this in many ways? And they've never given a counter, and yet they'll still repeat the same talking points and say it's been proven. And Zach has shown this. Zach Hancock, a population geneticist, has shown that this works. I'm just like, well, like how? I mean, it's right there, right there. I mean, if you want, I mean, I could spoon feed them through all the mechanics of why this is true if they won't believe the generative AI explanation. But I mean, come on. I had actually been on a Peaceful Science website. I posted this issue that the score of fitness depends on the environment. And I said, well, look, that's kind of worthless. If you're going to make a claim that natural selection did this, you can't define what attributes it's going to maximize because you don't know what the environment is. You're just assuming it's done. That's not a theory. I'm sorry. That is just like a pure faith belief that you had an environment that could build it. And there's nothing, there's nothing showing that that is feasible, because we have experiments that, first of all, destroy genes rather than building new ones. And I could cite the Lenski experiment. This is hilarious. And more about constructing new genes. But let's just go again to what generative AI had to say in response to just a simple Google query. I mean, I'm kind of laughing. It's like, well, it's affirming everything I said. Key points about why fitness is considered ill-defined. Oh my goodness, this is so funny. Relative. Fitness is always compared to other individuals within a population, meaning an organism might be fit in one environment, but not in another. Like, duh. So this whole thing, it's like, well, natural selection's improving its fitness. What they don't say is it's improved its quote unquote fitness in that environment, but it's made it maladapted to others. And I'm not the first to say this. Stanley Salty had an essay. It was informal, and it's unfortunate I don't have, he didn't formalize it. But and Stanley Salty, by the way, is a respected evolutionary biologist who's given up on Darwinism. And so this thought is not original to me, but I mean, I kind of like deduced that. And it was reassuring that even a Darwin-honest or God-honest evolutionary biologist in Stanley Salty totally saw this. To some extent, you could say that of Richard Lewontin and Ariu. So, just saying, so let's continue. Key points about why fitness is considered ill-defined. So we covered relative, not absolute. Components of fitness. Fitness encompasses multiple factors like survival, finding a mate, and producing viable offspring, making it hard to measure all aspects accurately. Environmental dependence. The environment significantly influences an organism's fitness, meaning the fittest trait can change over time with environmental fluctuations. Like, yeah, duh. So you have no clue exactly what environmental factors specifically would mold the emergence of these new functional highly complex proteins. You have no clue. You just accept it. And yet you claim it's been mathematically proven. What counts in an evolutionary biologist's standards of mathematical proof is really kind of, questionable. I mean, compared to other scientific disciplines, which I have studied, like say in physics, which would include celestial mechanics, electromagnetic theory, quantum mechanics, statistical mechanics, classical mechanics, relativity, geometric optics, celestial mechanics, oh my goodness, all sorts of other things. That's where you see real mathematical proof that can be verified experimentally. Just to say that it evolved by natural selection is kind of ridiculous when you don't know what the environment was. You don't know the initial conditions. You don't know what the individuals in the population were that it was competing with. You don't know what gene or section of the genome started to mutate. You have all these unknowns and you're saying it's proven. I have a serious problem with that, to make these bald assertions, and it just doesn't square with the level of evidence that you can even in principle gather. So now let me continue on. Challenges in measurement. While researchers often use proxies like survival rate or reproductive success to measure fitness, directly quantifying an organism's lifetime reproductive success can be complex. Well, that's not as biting as the other things. But I mean, guys, I've repeated this for almost 4 years, and they just seem like totally deaf. And I can spoon feed them stuff that their own fellow evolutionary biologists have pointed out. I can get them to basically admit all these same problems here, and they'll say, well, this is the right way to define it. I'm like, okay, well, how do you define right? Does that help you solve the problem of what you're trying to solve? Which is, how do we have the features of complexity, which is, as Darwin said, organs of extreme perfection and complication. Origin of Species, chapter 6. And he argues natural selection, or so-called natural selection, it's really fantasized selection, can build it step by step. The reason I say it's fantasized selection is because that's not what really happens in nature. It's not natural, and it's not selection. Selection is not the right word. Selection is when you're goal-oriented toward a goal. I mean, if you say the goal is improving copy efficiency, that's achieved by losing complexity. So you're not going to get organs of extreme perfection and complication, as in complexity. This has been illustrated numerous times in numerous experiments and is sound theoretically. I mean, guys, it's not that hard to say, gee, a bacteria that has a smaller genome and has is only one cell, it can reproduce 1,000 times over, in just a few days. Whereas that's not feasible for a complex eukaryotic organism like a human being or a turtle or an elephant or whatever. So reproductive efficiency right there would favor simplicity. And when you vary environments, something specializes, the population will specialize to that environment, and in the process, it loses versatility, which means if it were to be in another environment, even ones that had the population previously occupied, it could be very well maladapted to it. And so it's not like selection, as Darwin envisioned, is cumulative, where, okay, you've improved in this area, and then you're going to just keep going to other environments and acquiring new capabilities. It doesn't work that way. This is more, what happens in reality is more analogous to a hiker who wants to get up the mountain faster. So he starts dumping all his winter gear, his extra food rations, his tent, his extra safety equipment, you name it. And he's moving along real fast. But let's say there's an adverse weather change and he's toast, or something else. Let's say he needed first aid and he has a little accident. See, this is the way, if so-called natural selection, which is better termed as the drive toward copying efficiency in the immediate environment, this is how it ends up making it maladaptive for other environments, including future environments where it could thrive, because it's just, dumping things that are not of immediate need. It has no foresight. And I don't know why this is so hard to comprehend, that this does not bode well. And experimentally, we know that we have had genes being lost. I mean, there are a few papers that are out, like selection-driven gene loss. I mean, should this be at all surprising? So, they say, well, look at all the phenotypic changes. And I'm saying, well, that may be interesting, but that's not proof that it was by emergence of brand new gene loci, new genes that are of high complexity and not duplicates of pre-existing genes, what we would call orphan or non-homologous genes. That doesn't happen in abundance. And even if it does happen to some extent, what good is it when in the struggle of existence, an organism like, say, an E. coli in Lenski's experiment loses 10 genes and And it doesn't make any that are verifiable, that are not complex and of no utility. I mean, you might get a transcription and maybe even a translation, but it could be just junk floating around. So what good is it if this drive toward copying efficiency, increasing copying efficiency, results in loss of complexity? That means Origin of Species, Chapter 6, which Darwin wrote, is completely wrong. We don't even need to immediately, although we could, start to invoke this all or nothing concept of complexity, which some have called irreducible complexity. I like all or nothing because it's just easier to understand. And greetings, Ben Rex. Thank you for visiting the show. I was just going on a tirade, and let me show you what I had found. You'll see this earlier, but I'll just catch you up on what went on. I just was a little frustrated interacting with some evolutionists claiming that their ideas are mathematically proven. And I was laughing because I said, the first thing you need to do is be able to prove you can even define what fitness is. And so I just Googled fitness, ill-defined concept, evolutionary biology. And look what Mr. AI responded. In evolutionary biology, fitness is considered an ill-defined concept because while it's a central idea for understanding natural selection, it can be difficult to precisely quantify and is highly dependent on the specific environment and context, meaning an organism's fitness can vary depending on the situation, making it challenging to define universally. Essentially, fitness is more about an organism's reproductive success relative to others in the population rather than a single measurable attribute like size, like strength or size. And like, oh my goodness, have I not been saying this for the last 4 years? And evolutionary biologists and evolutionary promoters and evangelists have been treating me like, Sal, you're off the wall. Your ideas, fitness is well defined, and it should be, it's the way we define it in evolutionary biology is the right way. And I'm just like, say what? And this has been going on for 4 years, and no one on their side has conceded that I'm right. And I'm just like, how can you have a scientific theory that has such an amorphous, practically useless definition of fitness that you're not going to be able to prove anything with it? If you're saying that natural selection built this or that in the distant geological past, because some were more fit than others, it's like, well, that's not gonna cut it, because you cannot tie it to an attribute. It says look right here, you can't tie it to attributes, much less something as general as complexity. It's right there. I mean, is any evolutionary biologist going to doubt me on that? I mean, come on. Show me how you can refute this. Oh my goodness. So, I'm just gloating here, honestly. I was a little frustrated, and they treat you like you're so off in left field. And here it is. An AI Google search of evolutionary literature has pointed this out. Oh my goodness. Let me see if I can even find. Look, okay, so I'm sorry you don't see what I just am looking at. It's the AI generator is even going to list the references it used to construct what I just said. Defining Fitness and Evolutionary Ecology. So let me look. I'm curious now. Maybe it's a good hit, maybe it's not. This doesn't look very promising. I mean, it's just kind of more the same. Here it is. Nevertheless, defining and quantifying fitness remains challenging. Oh, yeah. Just what I said. I mean, there'll still be an apologist for it, but this is still, in my opinion, this is a mess. And here's another one. Fitness is a central concept in evolutionary biology, but there's no unified definition. And I got to tell you, there's no way, if it's environmentally dependent, how are you going to reconstruct what the environment was in a way that's sufficient to make your argument work? That such and such a new gene / protein evolved. To hear Dr. Dan said it's been proven, I'm just like where? How can you even in principle prove it? It's just a faith belief. And then I've added to that some considerations just experimentally. But if you want to add the all or nothing complexity issue, and I can point out specific proteins, you can't say that was proven, because you have to go through so many proteins, estimate the probability, its characteristics, etc. That's not an easy thing to do. So yeah, I am absolutely gloating. Not that maybe anyone except some friends like you would be even interested to watch, but there is some satisfaction knowing I was right. And I do want to say I owe it to, I feel I do owe it to some extent to the viewers of this channel, to kind of reassure them that when when I have insisted I'm right and I find even more confirmation, I hope that reassures you that some of the stuff that I've been saying on this channel, you can count on it. I don't want to be disseminating stuff that's going to mislead people, but I think you can take this one to the bank at this point. Let's look at this one. Accumulating glitches. And this is on the Nature website, by the way. So let's see what it has to say. Thanks to the phrase, fitness is quite a paramount idea in popular perception of evolution. The description was originally coined by Herbert Spencer after he read The Origin of Species. Darwin later adopted it in later editions, and it's been popular ever since. Unfortunately, this glib phrase often eclipses a more accurate depiction of evolution, leading to some common misunderstandings. The confusion arises because fitness has different meanings in evolutionary biology than it does in general usage. In its common usage, the term fitness is connected with the idea of being in shape. Let me just make this bigger. Being in shape and associated physical attributes. This is quite different from its use in biology. To an evolutionary biologist, fitness simply means reproductive success and adapted to its environment. There are several ways to measure fitness. For example, absolute fitness measures the rate after selection, while relative fitness measures differential reproductive success. That is the proportion of the next generation descended from a particular organism or genotype compared with competing organisms or genotypes. Leaving those details aside, the point is, and I'm sorry for the formatting, the point is that fitness is simply a measure of reproductive success. Like I call it copying efficiency. Is natural selection a tautology? So what are we to make of the phrase survival of the fittest? After all, if fitness just means relative reproductive success, then the phrase becomes survival of the successful reproducers. Since evolutionary survival can also be understood as reproductive success, this simply becomes reproductive success of the successful reproducers. Reducing the vaunted theory of evolution by natural selection to a circular argument, a tautology. Of course, evolution doesn't actually reduce to a simple bit of circular reasoning. The flaw in this argument is the idea that survival of the fittest describes the mechanism of evolution. Fitness is just bookkeeping. Oh my goodness, survival of the fittest just describes... The flaw in this argument is the idea that survival of the fittest describes the mechanism of evolution. Fitness is just bookkeeping. Survival and differential reproduction result from natural selection, which actually is the driving mechanism of evolution. Oh, it's going to go on and on. That wasn't getting to the point I was trying to say. Oh, your insight in several topics certainly helped me give confidence in the Yek idea. I'm still agnostic when it comes to the question of the age of the Earth, but I think Yek is a worthy contender. Thank you. And thank you, Ben Rex, for visiting. Have a great day, rest of the day. I know you have to leave. Thanks for dropping in. So this was just for me to just to rant a little bit and have a little fun and gloat. I got to credit this AI algorithm that it's able to deduce some of this stuff. I mean, it's reassuring to see that it can search all the literature out there in its knowledge base and come to the same conclusion. Let me just try. Oh, well, thank you for that. And I do have, I think my radio shows are more fun, than these than these shows that are just off the top of my head. Okay. So anyway, have a good day. And I'm just looking through their list, the AI's list of what generated its analysis. It must be looking at a it must be looking beyond the listing it gave me. So see you later, Ben Rex. Thank you for dropping in. Take care. So I don't have much else. I mean, at this point, I'm beating a dead horse like Darwin beat his puppy. That's true. Darwin beat a puppy. He said so in his autobiography. So I'm beating a dead horse in this case of fitness. I mean, I just don't know how, someone can just say, it's been proven mathematically. I'm like, how? How can you prove that you had this environment that affected this nucleotide that led, or this set of nucleotides that led to the emergence of this gene? It's not provable. But okay, so at the best case, this is the best case, it's not provable into the affirmative. The worst case is that we can make a circumstantial case that the negative is likely closer to the truth, or virtually the truth. We can do this theoretically and also look at experimental results. And I've cited this DCUS gene inside of Lenski's experiments. It was only like 5 nucleotides off, maybe 1% of the entire gene was off. All it had to do is to repair 5 measly nucleotides, and maybe not even that much. If it had one insertion mutation in the right spot, it might have recovered the function. Let me see, 5, yeah. If you insert one nucleotide, you can recover 2 amino acids, and maybe it might work. But it's only 5, and it couldn't even resolve that after 80,000 generations. It certainly didn't work like the way Richard Dawkins' Weasel program would work, where you could take an arbitrary starting point and then compare it against a string, and then through a process of selecting among the candidates closer to that string, within only a few generations, it converges on the desired target. And it's like, well, it's established that DCSU gene, the way it would work really well is to express it and to be close to that form. It couldn't even recover that. It just sat around and did nothing. And we do know that had that gene been active, Dr. Scott Minnick and Dustin von Hafweigen had showed this quite convincingly, that if that thing had been actually functional instead of broken, like it was in Lenski's experiment, citrate utilization would have emerged very quickly, just insanely quickly. I mean, I think, if I recall correctly, it's on the order of a week instead of 15 years. So I just got to take another dig here. The creationists were able to evolve the bacteria way better than the evolutionists, because they had more knowledge and critical thinking, and they applied it with their intelligence, and they were able to design an experiment that could do it, but they could evolve the thing faster. I mean, you talk about showing up an evolutionist and saying, here, we're creationists, but we could show you we can evolve stuff better than you because we understand the mechanics of this. And the first thing is they're like, well, Lenski, the reason you're so slow is started off with defective bacteria to begin with. And the way Lenski was able to make it work was to break even more things. So, I mean, I think that's right. So it's really kind of funny. So it was shown then that this would have been a favorable path, but it's very difficult to fix that DCUS gene. One, because it's a frameshift mutation. That's very difficult to fix. And there's no reason that something shifted like that's ever going to recover when it's out of frame, because when it's out of frame, if it's not being expressed, then it can evolve neutrally, and that would mean that all sorts of stop codons could pepper it, put all these premature termination punctuation marks, and that gene would be really dead. Oh my goodness. So, it would diverge, because now it is a real pseudogene. And in that state, it's likely to just diverge farther and farther from what would make it a functional DCUS gene. So this definitely, that's an example that so-called falsely labeled natural selection doesn't work as advertised, because it's falsely advertised as such. It's more correct to refer to it as the drive toward copying efficiency. That's it. And Stanley Salthy has echoed those same kind of thoughts. So, there you have it. I made what might be called an irreducible complexity argument, but it played out. It played out. It also falsifies any sort of insinuation when Dr. Dan was promoting his claim that you're an irreducibly complex system like a viroporin was spontaneously rebuilt. I've said that cannot be extrapolated to other cases, and here you go, right there. It cannot be extrapolated to the DCUS gene in Lenski's experiment. Evolutionary biologists have a habit of, extrapolating and exaggerating the relevance of one trivial example to solve really far more complex systems. And in this case, this wasn't even that much more a complex problem. There's only 5 measly nucleotides that needed to be recovered. So that's an example right there of the inapplicability of any sort of insinuation that that somehow solves universally all the all or nothing type systems. So yeah, I feel pretty good tonight that I've been on solid empirical and theoretical grounds, and also really, theoretical grounds that I have shown that the definition of evolutionary fitness is insufficient to allow claims that evolution is proven mathematically. It's nothing farther from the truth. At best, it's unprovable. At worst, it's virtually proven as wrong. And I think I've definitely come very close to the latter. I certainly feel I have. Maybe not in the most formal sense, but at this point, the evolutionist, formally speaking, can't prove their case, and I can find quotes to that effect. And at worst, so at best, they can't prove it to the affirmative. At worst, we can examine data that would make it highly doubtful, and probably in the eyes of many, completely falsified. And I'm more at the end of completely falsified. I have very little interest to really keep beating this dead horse like Darwin beat a puppy. Sorry, I just had to take that jab. So That being said, I had a very nice interchange with Dr. David Snoke, who is a solid state physicist. You've seen him on my other channel with me. I approached him about developing a peer-reviewed review paper on quasi-particles in biology. We could probably publish it in some bioarchive journal or biomimicry or cross-disciplinary journal. It's like a lot of review articles are. It's not meant to break new ground. It's actually to summarize the state of a field. And quasi-particles are part of solid-state physics. Your transistors and computers run on quasi-particles. One called the hole. I wish they'd give it another name, because people, what's a hole? It's like, well, it's quasi-particle. It has mass, it has position, and it has charge. So it's virtually like a real particle. Is it? They'll say it's fictitious, but it's like, well, if it has, you can model as having mass and charge and position. It's like, well, it's virtually a particle. That's nature quasi-particles. And there could be some interesting philosophical debates as to whether they are actually as real as other particles, like, say, neutrons and muons, because, neutrons are made of electrons and protons and a neutrino, I think. And like, well, if it's made of other things, well, why can't we say that for any other kind of particle, except maybe to the exclusion of electrons and protons? Those are considered extremely elementary. So, who's to say a quasi-particle isn't a real particle? That's a philosophical debate. And, I'm more of a pragmatist. I'm not going to go there. It's an interesting philosophical discussion. So there are quasi-particles in semiconductors, but we're now finding out, you're looking into other kinds of quasi-particles that, namely the polariton, that can make next generation computers. There's interest in the polaron in chemistry, and it's tied to chiral-induced spin selectivity, which James Tour mentioned in his anti-Farina talks, which is legendary. It is legendary. The polaron. Now, just as a heads up, this is what I want to, Dr. Snoke asked me to submit some articles that we might consider putting in a review. And I found stuff on polarons and chiral-induced spin selectivity and polarons in biology. So there's a lot of polaron communication through DNA or proteins. That's phenomenal. There's also a quasi-particle called a phonon. And phonons apparently influence, they form in liquids. I just want to tell you guys, do you know how hard it is to build a system that leverages quasi-particles? It is so hard. A famous quasi-particle is called the Cooper pair. And for some of you, who are in the know, Cooper pairs relate to superconductors. It's not easy to build a system that leverages Cooper pairs, polarons, polaritons, phonons. What other quasi-particle? So I said Cooper pair, polaron, polariton. Oh, excitons. There are lots of excitons in biology, definitely in photosynthesis. And I think I was finding even some other ones today. So I have to send that off to Dr. Snoke, and we'll see if the project moves forward. Why am I mentioning that? See, I'm really torn, because to me, this is where there's an exciting field. I'm so tired of just beating a dead horse like Darwin beat a puppy. There's just, it's not very fulfilling. except to just reassure me that I was right. And I'm coming close to the end of the journey. It's like, well, how much more can I do? I mean, I think I've, exhausted a lot of, most of the best arguments. And at this point, I'd just be repeating myself. So, I'm ready to just start moving on. It might be that I'm just going to codify it and try to make it as accessible as possible and put it in an ID course. But I do think for a college level ID course, some of the stuff you've been hearing me say will stand up to scrutiny. And the fact that the generative AI is agreeing with me in its search of evolutionary literature is also reassuring. And it, and it's not like I'm the only one that's ever said this in so many words. So finally, let me show you something. This is what is so funny. I read, let me see if I could find it. Tonight, I read from the Internet Archive. So let me show you what I got. On Dr. Dan's channel, I read this. See, it says the full text of The Blind Watchmaker by Richard Dawkins. Evolutionary evangelist Richard Dawkins, considered the messiah of atheism, and he's promoting Darwinism. And it's just funny how he gushes over himself and his supposedly brilliant mind. And, all of that's it's just been destroyed by experiment and theory. He doesn't even know it, So, it's just really funny. They keep saying, oh, Darwinism isn't a word, except, it's only creationists that use it as a pejorative, as an insult. And I'm like, no, that's not the case. And this book was hailed by all sorts of evolutionary biologists. It's so funny. So this is Dawkins' own words. I'm just going to read parts of it. Just as all the chapters of the present book are different from each other, but the underlying theme is the same: Darwinism and design. I say that I do not apologize for this Darwinian continuity. Would be an understatement. Darwinism is a giant subject whose many faces are good for more books than could be finished in a full and satisfying career. Okay, let's see. I think I froze my system. Let's see if I can. Nope, it's frozen. Darwinism is a larger subject than either cookery or gardening. It is my subject, and it provides ample scope for one's lifetime expertise. I'm sorry about all this jumping around. Darwinism encompasses all of life: human, animal, plant, bacterial, and, if I am right in the last chapter of this book, extraterrestrial. So let me see if I could find more quotes about Darwinism. Here we go. The listeners who telephoned were genuinely interested in the subject of evolution. They were not hostile to it. They simply did not know anything about it. Instead of destroying arguments, I had the more constructive task of educating the innocent. It only took minutes to awaken them to the power of Darwinism as a convincing explanation of life. I got the impression that the only reason they had not seen its possibilities before was that the subject had been totally omitted from their education. Aside from some vague nonsense about monkeys, they simply did not know what Darwinism was. So there you have it. I mean, it's amazing how much someone can, like Darwin himself and really Dawkins, can devote themselves to something that's unprovable, as I've shown here. It may be unprovable in the affirmative, but it can be falsified circumstantially in the negative. And so these guys have just lived their lives for a delusion. And sadly, they probably ruined a lot of people's lives in the process. You've heard stories of, people going down the tubes because they lost faith that there might actually be meaning in life. So anyway, I had a lot of fun just gloating, and it also is satisfying knowing that what I've given the viewers of this channel has been, as far as the stuff we talked about today, has been good stuff. And that means a lot to me. If I'm aware that I've said something that was mistaken, I'll do my best to correct it. So there you have it. Merry Christmas. There'll be a coming show this Sunday with Carissa. We'll be talking about some things about creationism that we don't like. Maybe we could try to find a way out of some of the problems, at least how to deal with it. And I mentioned earlier in this show about chiral-induced spin cell activity, which James Tour himself talked about and introduced a lot of the viewers of his channel to. And as I mentioned before in another video, I will be sharing the stage with him in February 2025. So you all have a happy holidays and Merry Christmas. Glory and honor to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Good night.